2, 1.
Hello everyone, am I audible?
Yes, Rajiv, we can start the presentation now.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to Global Evaluation Week webinar entitled Evidence on Gender Equity and Inclusion Towards Women's Empowerment, a Reflection on Lessons and Challenges. Organized by Evaluation Community of India and CARE India. Let me introduce myself briefly. My name is Rajiv Nandi. I am a member of the core group of the Evaluation Community of India, and I'm here today to moderate this session. Let me say a few words about Global Eval Week and why ECOI and CARE are here. Global Evaluation Week is an initiative by CLEAR, Center for Learning on Evaluation and Results. The inspiration for Global Evaluation Week comes from the acknowledgement of two forces that are shaping today's evaluation landscape. One, the global knowledge that shapes local evaluating practices, and local experiences that influence global evaluation thinking. Now in South Asia, JPAL is the partner of CLEAR in organizing this Eval Week. In last few years, Global Eval Week has become a platform for evaluation and knowledge sharing and networking events. Evaluation Community of India, along with CARE, we are happy to be part of this initiative as event organizers, and we thought it's an important platform for continuing our discussions in bringing the gender transformative lens in development discourse. For today's session, we have two panelists. Let me introduce them. Panelist one, Nidhi Bansal. Nidhi is the Senior Director, Program Operations and Quality Learning Unit, CARE India. She is a senior gender equality expert with over 2 decades of experience in driving the vision for women and girls' rights, implementing gender transformative programs, and quality assurance across several countries in Asia, Africa, and North America. As a senior director program, she is responsible for ensuring technical excellence of programming across CARE India's portfolio. With the goal of empowering Dalit and Adivasi women and girls and their attainment of secure and resilient lives. Our second panelist is George Kurian. George is the head of Impact Measurement Unit in CARE India and has over 24 years of experience in designing and operationalization of M&E systems in health, education, livelihood, multi-sectoral development, and rehabilitation projects. He provides technical assistance in designing, monitoring, and evaluations of projects in health, education, livelihood, climate change, adaptation, etc. Before we begin, briefly on the structure of the session today, I'll request both the panelists to speak or present 10 minutes each, followed with some comments by the moderator and quick response from the panelists. And next, we'll open it up for the Q&A session. So you may please post your questions in the Q&A section. Now, Nidhi and George, we all know the rhetorical use of empowerment in the development discourse started taking shape in the mid-20th century as a means to challenge power structures for the public good. As Naila Kabir, one of the most prominent feminist economists of today, nicely defined empowerment as the expansion of people's ability to make strategic life decisions in a context where this ability was previously denied to them. Similarly, the debate on women empowerment has intensified as a fundamental approach for transforming power relations in favor of women. Like as Reeves and Baden defined women's empowerment as a bottom-up process of transforming gender power relations through individuals or groups developing awareness of women's subordination and building their capacity to challenge it. Let me tell you, both these definitions were drafted 2 decades ago. We are still challenged to bring further clarity in terms of both ideas and context-specific strategies to deconstruct disempowerment towards finding ways to achieve empowerment and equality. Now, Nidhi, I'll come to you first with the request to illustrate how CARE India, as a premier development agency working in India for nearly 7 decades now, views women's empowerment and the key issues of transforming power relation through its principles and approach towards building evidence, and what lessons it brings on the table. Nidhi, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Rajiv. Thanks for the introduction and also introducing the issue of empowerment, women's empowerment, which is such a hotly debated topic, and yet I would say not a very well agreed topic. But before I go into talking about CARE's approach and CARE's framework on women's empowerment, I was just thinking it's pertinent to talk a little bit about the context that we are currently navigating, which is this COVID-19 and the accompanying blockage of restriction of movements. This context gives everyone a taste of what disempowerment feels like. This is a reality of disempowerment hitting home. And if I were to, I won't be making a very long shot if I said this is the reality of most of the women's lives for all of their life, from the time they are born till the time they breathe their last. Especially in a country like India, which has entrenched gender norms. This is how women live. They are told what is to be done, what is not to be done, where to go, where not to go, what is theirs, what is not. There's no decision that they are able to make. So I think this is exactly the time when we should be talking about what needs to be done for women's empowerment. Another, on a lighter note, another thing which is happening right now is I came across this very interesting meme. We are all connecting through this 11-inch screen all the time, and I hope we will not do this to you all. And I hope we will be able to keep this discussion livelier than what we see on this screen. Anyway, jokes apart, CARE's work in India spans over now close to 7 decades, and we are currently present in over 14 countries and implementing large-scale programs aimed at ending poverty and injustice, and that vision is to be brought about through facilitating the empowerment of women and girls. I would like to dwell a little bit on why CARE focuses on women and girls. So for us, it is a question of social justice and economic justice. We all know that women are disproportionately affected by poverty and discrimination and suffer abuse in realization of their rights and access over resources. And therefore, primarily for us, working on women's empowerment and our focus on women and girls is a matter of justice, is a matter of their rights. So it is the right thing for us to do. But it is also the smart thing for us to do, because we know, and there are multitudes of studies that prove that women and girls have the power to help communities overcome poverty and social injustice. We all know the adage very well. You educate a woman and you educate a family. But I would reiterate that that is not the primary reason. I would be happy to educate a woman if it only educated the woman and not the family. even then I would say we would be doing that. But there is a bonus that you educate a woman and you educate the family. Now, moving to CARE's definition of women's empowerment. So what Rajiv presented two definitions, both of which focus on the woman's own self, woman's own abilities, her own capabilities, dreams, aspirations, and her ability to engage with the external. And CARE's definition is not far from that. But I would say where CARE has sort of gone a step ahead of those definitions is that CARE is looking at women's empowerment as not just focusing only on women, but a sum total of changes that are needed for a woman to realize her full human rights. So it's not just about her own aspirations and capabilities. It is very important. It is the primary objective of primary core of women's empowerment is to build her own agency, to be able to change her own aspirations and capabilities. But equally important are the changes that need to happen in the environment that dictate those choices, as well as the interactions and the relationships that she engages in. And this triad of, we call this triad the triad of agency, structure, and relations. And almost all our work dealing with either health, education, livelihoods, or disaster response deals in all these three domains, where we try to work with women and girls themselves to build their aspirations, capabilities, self-image, self-efficacy, as well as look at the environment that surround and conditions the choices. Those could be the structures, those could be the formal structures like the laws and policies and government and state institutions, or informal structures like her family, the marriage as an institution, community as an institution, or more locally, the neighborhood as an institution. So there are written and unwritten norms over there which define her choices. And lastly, the relationships. And we have over the years, we have realized that relationships are a powerful area that women need to navigate to realize empowerment. And therefore, it's a very important area where norms are practiced, by the different stakeholders. And it is her ability to negotiate, her ability to transact those relationships, and these could be close relationships like intimate partners, married, kith and kin, neighbors, or more formal relationships with the employer, with the market forces, with the state actors. All these relationships fall in this realm. So there are these three realms of agency, structure, and relations, and a sum total of changes in these three areas is what for us defines the framework for women's empowerment. Moving beyond, we have also, there is no one way of defining women's, defining the outcomes that could be considered as women's empowerment. We all understand that women's empowerment is a process of social change, and it differs from context to context and culture to culture. It depends on what are the relationships she has to negotiate. What is the starting point for a woman? What are the triggers of empowerment in a particular culture? How far the control over her decisions and control over her choices conditions her being in a context, defines empowerment and defines the outcomes or indicators of empowerment in different contexts. However, what CARE has tried to do is to pull together 23 different sub-criteria. And these criteria, this is not a full list in any sense, nor a comprehensive list, nor a dictative list. This is just an indicative list of what are the kinds of social changes that we want to see in the realm of agency, in the realm of structure and in relations, if we want to say these are the processes that lead to women's empowerment. And therefore, in order to assimilate the diverse lived realities of women, these 23 sub dimensions have been created. There's a few examples of what are these sub dimensions. Like for agency, it would be around decision making, self-confidence, mobility, leadership, access, and not only access but also control over resources, control over decision making. In structures, it is about participation, about representation and a voice in these structures, individually or collectively. So it's very important in case of women's empowerment to bear in mind that it may not always be about individual empowerment. It's also equally important to look at collective empowerment and roles and responsibilities as well as norms that define a structure. In relationships, some of the areas of change that we would like to keep assessing are negotiation, the alliances that women are able to build from local level, for example, alliance with local youth groups or alliance of women's groups, up to a global level of like the feminist groups alliances. And then new social relationships. So negotiating and changing the power dynamics in these relations is what we need to measure. So these are some of the ways in some of the variables that we try to see when we talk about women's empowerment. I would like to now take a few minutes to talk about the gender transformative change. So we all are familiar with the gender continuum, which starts with gender harmful programming and moves on to gender neutral programming, to gender sensitive, responsive, and then the highest level of gender integration is gender transformative change. And that is the level at which women's empowerment starts playing out. It's very important, if we are talking about gender transformative change, that the process of women's empowerment is set in place to achieve those transformative changes. We have a women's empowerment framework of agency, structures, and relations that I just talked about. And then how do we do it is through a social analysis and action approach, which is a participatory and a reflective approach. And in a moment, I will talk about how it is participatory and reflective. And there are a number of tools that that CARE has worked on in the course of years to talk about to put this approach into action. So you know how the gender transformative approach works in action, and I talked about reflection and participatory processes. So we see it as a cycle. It's as a cycle of social action and analysis. Right in the middle of that cycle is oneself. So if I am working on a project on gender transformative change or women's empowerment, I would put myself in the center, and that would be the starting point. Transforming my capacity, my ability to self-reflect on my own attitudes, beliefs, and practices is absolutely critical for the success of this cycle. So starting with oneself, there are tools, well-developed modules for this reflection, challenging and facilitated transformation at a personal level of staff. Once you achieve this, I think half the battle is won. But then staff members who feel empowered, who feel committed, who feel that they understand the change in their own personal life are then equipped to work with the community and do the similar reflection with community. And when I say community, it includes women, men, girls, boys, all the marginalized section, all the vulnerable groups in a community to be included in that reflection. And this reflection is around social norms, values, discrimination that the groups face, the root causes, why they face this. This reflection is extremely important in creating an awareness and realization, as well as an acknowledgement across the board that such discrimination does exist and that there is a need to change. Unless the community, the women themselves and the community members accept that there is a need to change, no change is possible. So with that as the foundation, those two things, I would say the staff and the community understanding as the foundation, the next step is planning for action with the community on what are the key facets of discrimination, and then addressing what are the ways to address that. Implementing those plans using project resources, using community resources, using CARES resources and individual resources. And then a process of continuously evaluating and learning, reflecting at even that level, learning about the changes in individuals, in groups, structures, policies, laws, and social norms. So this is an ongoing cycle that we would like to follow in all our processes, where we keep exploring, challenging, exploring, reflecting, and learning all the time. Now, some of the domains that we look at when we are talking about women's empowerment are capacities, capabilities, and self-esteem that come from the agency piece, leadership at multiple levels, which is interconnected with the agency, but also spans into the area of structure where leadership is extremely important. Attitude, support, and recognition. Again, this spans across the three domains. Access, ownership, and influence. Influence is about the voice. Access could be access to spaces, access to opportunities, access to knowledge, and access to resources. And then ownership of those, all of those elements. And then lastly, policies, development structures, and institutions. So these are some of the program areas. Now, the programs may differ, but generally this is the framework within which we design the program, be it our livelihoods programs or education or health projects. But these are some of the elements that we like to incorporate in our women's empowerment, from a women's empowerment perspective. We have evaluated our projects over a period of time, and my colleague George will talk at length about evaluation, what we have learned from the evaluation about this interconnected domains of agency structure and relations. But some of the project evaluations have shown us, very, I would say modest. Sometimes the results may look very modest, but critical progress markers. And some of the areas where we have seen changes are around, over a period of time when you work with women and men, then we are seeing joint decision making, sometimes also control over assets. But where this fails is beyond the project interventions. So beyond project interventions, how this control over assets and joint decision making is progressing is something that we need to look at. Another area is the sharing of roles and responsibilities. Sharing of roles and responsibilities is one area where we consciously try to engage men on norms, on practices, and then look at, try to see specific changes in action. And we do see that, but where the challenge lies is we are seeing acceptance of women in newer roles, but the level of acceptance of men taking up roles that are considered feminine is still low, is still not as high, and we would like to push that bar further. These are some of the areas where we have seen evidence from impact evaluations, and I think my colleague will be able to speak much more in detail about how the 3 domains and the 23 subdomains that we look at in the process of empowerment, where we have seen changes, where and how we have measured those changes, and what are the challenges that remain. What are some of the learnings that we have drawn from that? Thank you so much. Over to you, Rajiv.
Yeah, thank you, Nidhi. Thank you so much for providing an excellent overview of CARES approach. I have few comments, but I'll reserve those for the time being, and I'll go to George now. George, given the ever increasing focus on the of the government, funders, development organizations on including women in various schemes and programs, it is imperative to make a distinction between programs that are for women and women's empowerment towards shifting power relations. Because in the present scenario, anything happening with or for women falls under the category of women's empowerment. Now, my request to you would be to illustrate the methodological part of CARES work in addressing women's empowerment in terms of framework and measurement of empowerment and the specific lessons learned. Over to you, George. George, you have to unmute yourself. George, you have to unmute yourself. Yeah. Yes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Rajiv. And thank you, Nidhi, for the excellent perspective on understanding women's empowerment and various aspects of women's empowerment from 3 different dimensions. All the 3 dimensions are equally important for women to achieve full human potential. And in this presentation, what I would like to pay attention is looking at what are the factors that can facilitate women's empowerment and inclusion. There are different aspects which has been clearly mentioned as part of the empowerment framework. That's important to understand from the point of view of the movement of some of the changes in agency structure and relation. So what I would like to do during this presentation is to share with you a study that has been undertaken by CARE, which primarily try to look at does collective and collective action contribute to women's empowerment, and what factors can we learn from to improve women's inclusion and empowerment. This study has been done in 4 states on different types of collective. To put it specifically, about 6 types of collectives, looking within the different interventions of care, health, livelihood, education, and livelihood. And the study looked at within the women's empowerment framework on agency structure and relationship, what kind of factors can we learn and find that can promote empowerment. This was a quasi-experimental design. We selected the treatment from CARE's operational area and control from non-project areas of CARE. It had both quantitative and qualitative component, and both the results of qualitative and quantitatives were combined to arrive at a empowerment score to examine what are the important determinants of women's empowerment in all the three agents, in all the three important dimensions of empowerment, which has been explained earlier in terms of agency, structure, and relations. And for us to learn that what factors really made a difference in each of these dimensions, I will be taking you to each dimensions of this present the empowerment dimensions. The first dimension that I would like to take to is about women's empowerment inclusion through the agency lens. There were about 10 variables on which we looked at women's agency, and as you have already heard from Nidhi in her presentation, that access and control of material assets is a important aspects of women's agency. And so we looked at women having access to cash and women having access to saving as an important parameters across different collectives. And then we found, although the treatment group displayed higher and better performance than the comparison groups on parameters of access and control over family resources, there are also, we found in certain type of collectives, this access and control are different. Now we did a detailed regression analysis. What are some of the factors that is making differences to improving women's access and control? And what we found was that every 1 unit increase in number of assets owned by a woman, women's empowerment is likely to increase by 0.2 units. Every 1 unit increase in number of assets owned by members of livelihood collectives or health collectives, whatever it is, it may increase women's empowerment by 0.150 and 0.102 units respectively, which means ownership and access and control of material assets is an important determinant of if you want to promote agency. Higher the assets control, higher the likelihood of women becoming empowered. The second aspect of the agency that we looked at is self-efficacy, which is actually speaking up in PRI and expressing opinions at community meetings. Even when PRI members, in case they are not fulfilling their duties, speaking up in on needs for infrastructure, expressing opinion at community meeting, etc. We found the treatment groups show relatively higher confidence to express their opinion. And what our regression analysis actually indicated, the factors or characteristics that promote self-efficacy, which is an important aspect of promoting women's empowerment. Women who attend collective meetings frequently are 1.3 times more likely to have higher scores on self-efficacy. Women who have been part of older collectives, who have been very long or old, are 1.1 times more likely to have higher scores on self-efficacy, which means there is something which if you want to promote on self-efficacy, the long association and attendance in the meetings are important determinants for promotion of women's empowerment. On the leadership, the third variables which we looked at on agency, the new roles after becoming member of our collectives, be it office bearer position, becoming a member of a community based organization, becoming a community leader, resource person, or even a PRI member or an ASHA worker, we found that that 43% of women have taken new role after becoming a member of a collective, which is very interesting and encouraging. And also we found about 36% of women leaders are accepted in their communities when they are part of a collectives. So some of the determinants from our regression test that actually pointed out, members who frequently attended collective meetings are likely to have higher scores on leadership dimensions. On the decision making, which is another important aspects of agency, the ability to make decisions, and make choices for oneself. So participating and influencing decision making process at the community level or at the household. And what we have found, the regression analysis was not able to show any statistically significant correlation. But also we have learned, from experience from this study, also from earlier, the evidences that Nidhi mentioned from various project evaluation, that the decision making largely for most important decisions with the members other than women in the family, especially husband or men within the family, and challenging some of this norm or to make decisions on their own at the household level is actually moving, but a very gradual and slow process. There hasn't been any determinant that has been able to find out from this study. Moving on to the second dimensions of the empowerment framework, actually to understand the sum total of changes, I think the structure and related changes are also equally important. In this under a structure, we looked at the variable about women's access to market and opportunities in the emerging context of either business or income generation or whatever it is. What we have actually learned, found from the analysis is that women who have been associated with collectives for a longer duration are 1.3 times more likely to score high on market accessibility. Women who are involved with the different types of collective, whether it is a women only collectives or a mixed collectives or some other producers collectives, whatever it is, they are 1.7 times more likely to have higher scores on market accessibility. So these are some of the important factors that actually facilitated or contributed to enhancing women's access to market and other opportunities. The second dimensions that we variables under the structure we looked at is participation and representation in political and civil society. And what we found that respondent actually held confidence and able to assume new roles and leadership in about 50% of the respondent in the treatment group, which was higher. But the analysis of what are some of the factors that really making a difference to civil society political participation is women who are associated with older collectives and with a collective which is larger in size are 1.0 times and 1.1 times more likely to have higher scores on political and civil societies, civil society representation, which means that the representation of collective women in the collectives and in public spaces would mean that they are associated in a longer time with collectives and they engage at that level more importantly. Moving on to the third dimensions of inclusion and empowerment, which is the relation lens. And within that, we have looked at the challenging social norms and, negotiation space, the reaction of society when women doing men's work, which is actually in the traditional space, if women did something and, challenging those kind of social norms. The reactions, for example, that we have seen from men, in the treatment, there is seen a lesser, mocking and disapproval of when women undertaking such traditional roles and changing the traditional, role and playing some men's role. There is, some changes, but in the control, it's actually been much higher. So the factors that really made a difference that we saw across different collectives when it was analyzed, women who are actually members of a livelihood collectives are 4 times more likely to score higher on challenging social norms dimensions, and women who are part of a larger collectives are 0.9 times more likely to have higher scores on challenging social norms. So these are some of the determinant that we found that can really make a difference to social norms, dimensions of women's empowerment. So there were many variables, and for this presentation that what I would like to sum up in terms of the factors that really making a difference to women's empowerment and thereby contributing to their inclusion and their ability to actually make choices on their own. So the determinants that I have from the regression analysis of this study has been: one, members with longer period of association and those who attended meetings frequently are more likely to have higher levels of agency. So length of association and frequency in the meetings, are going to make a difference. Members in large, medium-sized collectives who held a position in collectives are more likely to score higher on structure. Members in a large, medium-sized collectives are more likely to score on relationship, challenging norms of the dimensions. So looking at the various facets and variables of each of these dimensions of agency, relationship, and structure, we converted them into an indices and X-score. And then, we found that the agency aspect, which is decision making, self-confidence, self-efficacy, mobility, leadership, access, and control, made much higher, better improvement in terms of women's empowerment. The relationship and structure part did not move much and was, not found much improvement in the areas of women's empowerment. And for women to realize her full human potential, it is important that these changes in all these 3 dimensions are equally taken and moved incrementally and transformatively across all 3 dimensions. So summing up, women's empowerment scores reflect agency as the strongest dimension, followed by relation and structure dimensions. It is important to mention here that the construct of scales across 3 dimensions are varied. A set of parameters were different in each dimensions. The results, however, when looked in from the statistical regression, output showed that while collective characteristics and significantly predict variety of sub-dimensions of agency, the same is not true for structure and relations and sub-dimensions. So on looking at the three dimensions of empowerment, and the factors that really made a difference from the study are important lessons and insights if we have to, achieve, full holistic empowerment of women and transform their life for achieving their full human potential. These are some of the insights that I would like to share as part of this global learning and sharing platform. Thank you, and over to Rajiv.
Thank you, George. It's echoing. Okay. Okay. So, both Nidhi and George, your presentations were complementary to each other, and I mean, one common thing that both of you come to synthesize your knowledge and experiences through a critical reflection on lessons learned and take it forward. Now, one common frame that both of you followed is the three domains of agency, structure, and relations that the part of CARE's definition of women's empowerment. Now, I have a broad. I won't make any specific comment or question, but two very broad questions to both of you. Both of you may respond to those comments or questions. Now, I mean, Nidhi and George, why do you think change is necessary in all three domains, agency, structure, and relationships? Why it is not sufficient to identify one strategic area of change and put all your efforts on that? And this is linked with our approach is contributing both at the level of discourse on empowerment and at the policy level in the decade of SDGs. And another question I have, maybe for George more, but Nidhi also can respond. What's your view on applying quantitative measures to a complex and multi-layered concept like empowerment, where relations, gender norms, and customs, they're very difficult to measure quantitatively? And the second part would be how the measurement indicators are developed. So you may take 5 minutes each to respond before we open it up for question and answer session. Yeah. Nidhi, you want to go first?
Sure, I can start attempt. Thanks for those questions, Rajiv. Maybe you asked George, but I would like to respond to the issue of applying quantitative measures.
Please. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Yeah, because that's a subject very close to my heart. Having worked on gender aspects for over 25 years, and I must put a disclaimer, I'm not trained on gender at all. So all my work is hands-on, all my learning is hands-on. And therefore, in this hands-on learning, I've realized that empowerment is a process of change. It's a journey of change and not an outcome by itself. When I look back 20 years, 20 years back where I started from and where I am today, I've traversed a very long journey. But can I say that I am empowered? Probably I can't. There are so many dimensions I still need to navigate. There are structures that I still haven't challenged. There are relationships that I still haven't navigated. So for me, empowerment is a journey of change, and applying a very quantitative, dry number to my journey is something that makes me a little bit uncomfortable, I would say, though CARE has presented very well. At CARE, we have tried to put a number to the different measures. So at the back of it are certain qualitative ways to measure it, but then in the end, a composite index has been developed. But I do think that there is a need to develop more qualitative tools that can capture the journeys and the specificities of the journey, not only the journeys and cumulative results of those journeys, but also individuals' journeys. So, for example, I may have started with a lot of privilege, and therefore, for me, empowerment and triggers of empowerment will be very different from a a girl who has been brought up in a Dalit community, who has lived in multiple kind of restrictions. For her, being able to stand up and say a few words in a meeting would be empowerment. For me, perhaps not, because that is a privilege that I was born with, to be able to stand up in a meeting and speak. So the way every woman defines empowerment is very different, and there has to be some qualitative measure to capture that diverse and rich experience of women. And I know it's a very difficult challenge, but George, I hope together we will be able to do something to it. George, over to you on this qualitative, quantitative debate.
Yeah, thank you, Niti. I think that's a very well thought out perspective in understanding and quantifying a complex phenomenon of change that is happening to the women's life. The issue and the debate around the science of looking at the changes that is happening to the life of women and making sense of the movement in that pendulum is definitely complex, and it is experiential based change transformation, which you have already detailed out in your introductory sessions. But it is equally important in that journey to understand and map how that journey happens on a set of variables which can be measured, maybe qualitatively, and then give a meaning in a way that can actually quantify and and then giving meaning to those numbers by way of the experiential movement that is being made. And so in the work that CARE has been doing, we have realized that although there has been significant improvement in economic and other well-being, women lagged behind on several aspects. And when we explored and tried to learn more deeper into it, that we realized that we need to also understand the normative level of changes. The norm level changes are also equally important. And today it is possible to be able to map some of those stereotypes and see how women began to change and challenge and overcome some of those normative level, structural and other issues. And so, yes, it is qualitative. At the same time, it can be converted to a certain quantity to infer to a larger number whether this is happening to women at all.
Thanks, Nidhi and George. I think now it's open for the question and answer session also, but already there are a few interesting questions there. So may I pick a few questions for you? I mean, if you, or you can also respond to the, because it's published questions now. So should I pick up questions for you, or Nidhi, you want to go? Nidhi, there is a
please,
question.
Yeah,
so
Rajiv,
these are,
pick up.
yeah. Let me read out one interesting question here. One important fact, anonymous, so I don't see the name. One important fact is that the battle for a significant part of the gender-related change is on the deep psychological level. As Nidhi mentioned, women may be ready to take up men's role, but males may not move toward taking up feminine roles and responsibilities. How do our studies help and get embedded in our programming to make a difference? That's the one question. And I also want to mention about this comment by Rekha. Is there a direct relation between collective types and influence at different levels, like agency, structure, and relations? So let's start with these two questions, and we'll wait for more questions. Maybe more coming. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for those very interesting insights. I would call them insights rather than questions, and I can probably share some of my thoughts on those. So this whole idea of psychological, the way we look at it is, this is a very deep-seated values, attitudes, and beliefs. So yeah, we can call it psychological at some level, but it's not just personal. It's very important to realize that you cannot pin it down to a personal. The psychology can be very individual and personal, but the attitudes, beliefs, and practices are shaped by the society, are shaped by the structures, are shaped by the norms. So that's why this triad of agency, structures, and relationships is an important triad that helps us understand that you cannot think about these changes at just individual level. So yes, between me and my husband, we may end up having a relationship, having a more gender equal relationship, more sharing of decision making, sharing of power, but that in itself is not sufficient to determine women's empowerment, because the moment if it is only about me and my husband and relationship, psychological interaction between me and her, or any two individuals for that matter, then we are discounting the norms and structures that uphold that psychology. And that's why the laws, the norms, the policies, and the power relationship between all different kinds of stakeholders that come from many different places. So a person's social stature will determine his or her power stature. Economic resources and access to those economic resources could be another area that starts determining. The sense of entitlement is another very important area which determines what would be my attitudes, beliefs, and practices towards people who I feel they're not entitled to those privileges. So so I would differentiate a little bit between psychology and attitude, beliefs, and practices, but I would agree with you in that it is very much about attitudes, beliefs, and practices. So at that level, the changes need to happen in person as well as collectively in the structures and relationships.
Yeah. Thanks, Nidhi. George, do you like to add anything to Nidhi's response?
Yeah, I would say that the unleashing of women's potential, though psychological, has to be demonstrated in reality. For example, a child who wants to go to a school maybe have self-efficacy to move, have mobility to be able to go to school, but its actualization is only comes when she actually goes to the school. So the psychological capability or being self-efficacious to be able to go to school doesn't necessarily result unless it is demonstrated, and therefore the empowerment has also an aspect of being actualization in the real life, and that's equally important besides being psychologically empowered. I would also like to address your second questions of the Rekha, which was about did we find any difference in terms of agency level changes in different types of collectives. Yes, certainly we found on various parameters of agency, they are differentially demonstrated. Just to give some examples, in the livelihood collectives, for example, in the SHG form of collectives, women had greater access to and control of financial resources and some extent decision making. But in other type of collectives, those aspect of change in agency was seen lesser than compared to other things. So there are more examples of those variants for even other aspects of agency.
Yeah. Thank you, George. I think there's another question from Sindhu. The question is, have you looked for the factors that unsettle the women on the journey of empowerment or process of empowerment? What derails them? And in such cases, whether these collectives and experience help them to cope up or bounce back? From your experience, maybe Nidhi, George, or any of you?
Sure, I think this is a very deep question.
Yeah.
And maybe I can attempt to answer it at a maybe at a surface level. Some of the things that are much more obvious. However, this is one. If we had answered Sindhu, if we had answered to this question, probably our programming would be all successful programming. But anyway, let us try and attempt some thinking around it. So I think one area where we find the challenges is I would again go back to the area of norms. And norms are norms by definition are what you think people expect of you, how you expect to be looked upon, and how you think people what you think people expect of you. Something of that sort is the definition of norms. But basically, it says that it is a combination of two things. One, you are sometimes behaving because people pressure you to behave like that, and sometimes you behave because you think people expect that of you. And it is the second which derails people, or at the beginning, that is the biggest barrier for people to overcome, because most of the time women are held in their roles and responsibilities, and within that on the line defined gender norms, by creating a sense of expectation and a sense of punishment, a fear of punishment if they digress from that role. So when women start experimenting and moving a little bit out of that line, what we have seen is most of the time the backlash is not that high. Actually, the gradual acceptance is there of women taking up new roles, women maybe even speaking up, women challenging certain existing norms. But it is the fear, it is the fear of punishment, fear of being left out, fear of not having a support system in terms of family, in terms of rejected by family and community, is what derails women. That's one big challenge. So understanding where, for practitioners like us, it is very important to understand what are the realistic actual real threats, and how far women can challenge and move out of the of what is considered normative. That's one area. The second piece where women get derailed is lack of access to resources. So, and when I say lack of access to resources, I'm talking about all kinds of resources. It could be opportunity, it could be control over their own labor, it could be financial resources. That's another area. Or time being a very, very crucial resource is one more area where we have found a challenge which is very, very huge to overcome. And when, as George was demonstrating, when women have found resources, when we have supported them with economic, financial resources, opportunities, etc., then they have moved on that path of empowerment. So those two, on the face of it, seem to be very large challenges. And then are the structures that they need to navigate, the newness of structure, the mystery surrounding the structures, the lack of exposure to a lot of opportunities and lot of new newness of things. So for example, if you asked me to, on the day one when I was trying out this webinar, I failed at it because this was new to me. I was not exposed to it. So for women who have to navigate power structures, you can imagine that that fear of having to navigate structures could also be a huge challenge to overcome. George, you may want to add more insights.
Yes, Nidhi, I think you have clarified the aspects of normative level changes from a couple of examples from the work that we did in India. For example, in the livelihood spectrum, we had a program which really provided capacities for women to take farming as an important, women play a significant role in terms of, a lot of work in the agriculture sector. But when it comes to accessing these resources required to be a farmer, they actually lag far behind. And to assume some of the space where men used to dominate and to make women to take on, it's really a challenge by itself to move on to that space where that men has already been holding those domains. So the norm level changes are always taking more time and effort. And efforts to change them would also require changing men's attitude, engaging with men, and providing that creative, space and opportunity to be able to give women that space and leadership.
Yeah, thanks, George.
Rajiv, Rajiv,
yeah,
I see a very interesting question. Can I pick that up?
Please go ahead. Yeah.
So I see a question. During COVID-19 lockdown, by default, both men and women are inside the four walls of the home. So by virtue, men are assisting women in household chores. Is it contributing to gender?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's a very interesting question, and a paradigm that we all get. We all have at some point got entangled into. So I would say the way to look at it is, yes, we have been men and women have been forced into a situation, and in that forced situation, men have taken up certain roles and responsibilities. However, does it really lead to women's empowerment? Is it a step even towards women's empowerment? So if I bring it back to agency, structure and relations, I would examine whether it has number one, whether it has helped. Do women have any role in institutionalizing that men take up those responsibilities, not only assist in their chores, but take up that role and do it as their own role? Do women have any agency and any role in determining that? And my answer is no. The moment the situation will change, it will go back to what is considered normal, which is that women will do household chores and men will do work outside the home. So one, it has not brought about any change in the established roles and responsibilities of men and women. Secondly, also it continues to be seen as men assisting women, not seeing this as men and women's job. It is still considered a woman's job where men are assisting, and therefore they should be thanked or they should feel frustrated that they are assisting women and not doing their own family, their own work, and they're contributing to the family. So that's where the relationship bit also fails. And third is the structure bit. And at that level also, this I would say experience hasn't contributed much in changing the structure of the family, because unfortunately what we see all over social media are only jokes about men taking up these household chores, our frustration about men taking up these household chores, and furthermore jokes about women having a nice time while men are all stressed about it. So at that level also this has failed. So I think this could have been an opportunity where men could have taken a taste of what it feels to be restricted, to be told what to do, but unfortunately it hasn't contributed to empowerment.
Thanks, Nidhi. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's still no thought as assisting women, but not taking the responsibility. I'm very happy, Nidhi, that you ended this session with this note, and I think I no need to sum it up from my side. You summed it up so well with this last few minutes comment on that question. We have few more very interesting questions are there, but sorry, due to the paucity of time, we are already 11 minutes ahead of time. So, so I just want to close this question and answer session here, and I like to request Navneet Kaur from KI India to deliver the closing remarks and vote of thanks. Over to you, Navneet.
Thank you, Rajiv, and thank you everyone for an engaging conversation. We are a little over time, but I would like to, do not lose this opportunity to thank everybody here. First of all, I would like to acknowledge CLEAR JPAL South Asia for leading the global monitoring and evaluation knowledge learning movement. The global initiative of celebrating the evaluation week this week actually gave us opportunity to learn from each other through a series of events throughout the week. So on behalf of Evaluation Community of India and CARE India, we extend our gratitude to be part of this knowledge sharing and learning. It was a great opportunity to present practitioners' learnings on women's empowerment and reflecting on our lessons and challenges. I would like to offer my sincere thanks to ECOI and ISST for this learning and sharing collaboration. My special thanks to our esteemed panelists and the moderator for leading this enriching discussion. I would also like to thank our participants who are participating in this webinar. Thank you for being a patient listener and contributing with your comments and questions. Once again, thank you all for being with us this evening. It has been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. So, okay then, let's meet again, maybe after some time, with another topic, another issue, and there are already some requests to continue this discussion, a deeper discussion. So we may organize another webinar, maybe.
Yes, death by webinar is a reality. Thank you,
yeah, it's a new normal. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks to all participants.